Welcome to the Mystic Detectives podcast, where we seek to unlock the wonders of the unknown. I'm one of your hosts, Crystal Miller.
And I'm your other host, Andrea Marziano. Hey, Crystal, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well. Thank you so much. Anything exciting going on for you right now? Anything fun you've done recently?
Yeah, we decided yesterday it was high time for some shenanigans. So we went to lunch and had a great lunch. It was awesome because it was a restaurant called Pickles, and one of my dad's favorite restaurants in Utah is called Pickles. They're not at all similar, but it was still fun to go to a restaurant with the same name as my dad's favorite restaurant. And it was a very Jim's atmosphere, which was also kind of nostalgic. If anybody's from Utah, you might know Jim's restaurants with the breakfast, lunch, and euros, I would call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, food was really good. And I'm talking about in Moore, Oklahoma, is where Pickles is, in case anybody's curious. But then we went to a bar and had some drinks and played some pool and listened to some tunes. We got to control the jukebox. So the jukebox is one of those touch tunes ones. And the bartender brought over his phone and was like, I get like 1,000 of these a week, whatever music on you want. So we got to listen to some rad tunes of our choices.
Nice.
And then we went to an escape room, which was really fun. And it was different than any escape room I've ever done because it was 2 rooms that were identical. The mystery was identical, and they split us up. So it was me and Holly against Odyssey and Ash, and it was so fun. Odyssey and Ash won. We got hung up on like the second to last clue. It's funny because they got hung up on the first clue for a really long time, and we got through the first clues pretty fast. And then we got hung up on the second to last clue, which also we only got 1 hint and they got like 3. So if we'd got, and that what's funny too is it's not to say we didn't ask for hints. The lady just wasn't paying attention, so we just didn't get them.
Oh,
so
that's hilarious.
Anyway, yeah.
So I've never been to an escape room. What does that look like? How long does it last, or how does that work?
I've only been twice. Once with our illustrious founder Topher and a bunch of our friends, and then this time. And in both cases, we had an hour time limit. And basically, you start with 1 clue, and then you have to find additional clues until you basically reach the goal. And in this case, the goal was to get to the treasure before, the other pirates. In some cases, it's just escape. In some cases, it's figure out who the murderer was. And I mean, usually because they're called escape rooms, it's an escape situation. Get out before. I've heard of like get out before the aliens come. I've heard of it can be. I mean, it's really the sky's the limit, right? But it is basically just solving riddles, clues, hints, that sort of thing.
That sounds like fun. Yeah. I should probably do that sometime.
It's pretty fun. I recommend it. We also, with this one, we were just our own group. And when I was with Topher, we were also just our own group, but we had a bigger group. But often when you go, if there's only 4 of you, they'll put you in a bigger group so that there's 10 of you or whatever. And I don't love that as much because it feels there's a lot more pressure to like not disappoint strangers in the adventure, right?
And you don't mind being stupid around your family because they already know.
Exactly. So I liked that it was just the 4 of us, and we could have done a different one and done all 4 of us together also, but actually when we selected the 2-room one, we thought it would be all of us together with 2 rooms of hints, right? So when we got there and it was a competition, we were actually delighted. That was even more exciting for us. So
yeah, that seems like fun. Really fun. Well, how awesome is that? I really, like I said, that would be a lot of fun. I've heard of them where there are more than 1 room. So like you do something in 1 room and then go to a physical other room.
That's how our first
one actual room.
Yeah, so when I went with Topher, it was moving room to room. When we did it this time, it was just the 1 room.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, with like I think I had like I'm gonna visually count. I think I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 treasure boxes that we had chests, that we had to open. But they had different kind of locks on them. So like there were color coded locks, there were ABC locks, there were key locks, there were 1, 2, 3 locks, numbered locks. And so like you have to find the key, or you have to find the color pattern, or you have to find the the 4-digit number lock,
code or whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So it was really fun, and we were so close. And it was funny because the clue we got caught up on, I'm assuming nobody's really going to do this particular escape room anytime soon that are our listeners, but it had, I know that our listeners can't see me, but it had a sliding. So first of all, we had to find a way to unlock this sliding board, but it had a sliding board. You know how you have a chalkboard and you can cover one side or you can cover the other side. Yeah. And the clue was always choose the bigger treasure. And it had maps on either side with some graphics. Anyway, I knew the fact that the board slid had to mean something, the fact that we had to unlock it, I knew it had to mean something. And that's what we couldn't figure out. And that's where we got stuck. Anyway, it was Odyssey. That's the one that Odyssey figured out. And she showed us, and I was like, I knew it. I know we were so close.
Yeah, I get that. That's awesome. Well, how fun is that? I'm glad you had a chance to do some shenanigans. Yeah, yeah. We're going to go to some international festival tomorrow. I don't even really know what it is, but it sounds fun.
Nice.
So we'll see how that is.
Did I tell you I'm going to my 30th high school reunion?
You did, and I'm very excited. I can't wait to hear how that goes.
Me too. I haven't been back for 30 years. So, and, I don't know a lot of my former classmates very well. But I did RSVP to a beer and pizza party that's not, it's not school sponsored. It's student led of our class.
I love that.
And so I'm pretty excited and nervous. I'm so nervous. And partially I'm nervous because I'm fat and I have no boobs. And I'm like, hey. But on the same token, I'm pretty unapologetic about that as well. So it's like, whatever.
Yeah, and it's just life. I mean, that's how we are. And
exactly.
I know that sometimes it's tempting to go, I want to look my very best and have people go, oh, they're so awesome. But really, if they don't think I'm awesome because I'm chubby or whatever, then I don't need them to think I'm awesome. And so that works.
Because it's a boarding school and it's back east, I get this idea of like, I'm going to mingle with the elite and I'm just a farm girl from Utah, which I'm not a farm girl at all. So why I would think that is dumb. But, the reality is, and I know this, and they're not that elite. My friend Amira, who is also we're going together, said, these are just kids of doctors and lawyers who wanted to make sure that they were doctors and lawyers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I certainly wasn't going to school with the Rockefellers or
I understand. And it's all perspective too, isn't it?
It is.
Because we all have succeeded. Just the fact that we're still here means we've succeeded somehow.
That's
something.
Very true.
Well,
very true.
This is a mild segue into what we're talking about today. A little tenuous, but still. We're talking about being an empath. Now, when I say empath, do you have any thoughts that come to mind off the top here, Crystal?
Well, of course, I think of empathy because I'm a word person. My studies have been in writing and rhetoric, and, obviously that is made up of words. But also knowing the context of what we're talking about here, it does make me think of, to really simplify it, just really put it in layman's terms, it makes me, I think of feeling other people's feelings, experiencing what other people are experiencing. And of course, like I said, that's really simplified. It's not necessarily that simple. But that's kind of, when you ask me what I think of, that's what I think of, just real quick.
Yeah. And that has a lot to do with it. And one of the things I feel like I used to think until I started doing some of this research is that an empath and empathy were different things. But the more I looked into it, the more I thought, well, why on earth would I have thought that? Because really it's the same word. So first I want to bring out more of things about being an empath and then move into empath and empathy. And then there's the mystic empath, which is, I think, where it diverges just a little bit. It's still quite similar. But basically, like you said, an empath is someone who feels more empathy or maybe even understanding than the average person. And it's not an official psychological term, although it seems like sometimes it should be.
Especially if sympathy is. Do you know if sympathy is an official term?
Are you asking me or telling me?
No, I'm asking you. I would feel like
I don't.
If sympathy were an official term, then empathy should be an official term. But I don't know. I was just wondering if you know.
Yeah, no, I don't. And that's why I wasn't sure if it was a question or an answer. But one thing that it is obvious is that empaths are generally understood to be people who are extremely attuned to the feelings and emotions of others. And so the word itself comes from, as you said, empathy. And that's an ability to understand a person from their point of view rather than your own. Something like when people say, well, put yourself in their shoes. How would you feel? And that's what an empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And an empath will take that a step further. And not only will they be able to understand the point of view, but they may be able to understand the feelings and emotions involved. So some characteristics that are associated with empaths is, as we said, they have high empathy, that heightened ability to understand experiences and feelings. Now, we're not just talking about the average ability to people go, yeah, I get it, that when you had your toe stepped on, it hurt. I understand because, I've had my toe stepped on and I get it. But an empath or someone with a lot of empathy can go even steps further into that. And that made me feel like this, or I always feel like I'm in the way, or something like that. They'll move that further along, and it gives greater level of connection to that pain or happiness or feelings or whatever it is that person is experiencing. And then they can even sense it as it's part of their own emotion, of their own experience. And that's a little deeper than people who are just being empathetic. So using the same word for different levels of this experience can be a little problematic because it all sort of sounds like the same thing. So when I talk about the one who is an empath, it's just taking all of that a little bit deeper. Also, a lot of times empaths are having difficulties because they are overwhelmed by closeness. They sometimes can feel close contacts are challenging, and romantic relationships can be difficult because spending too much time with someone can lead to stress, feelings of overwhelm, or losing oneself in a relationship. And that also can go along with the fact that empaths sometimes feel distressed by asking for time alone because they just don't want to hurt anybody's feelings because they feel things to such a deep level. And so having, even though in a lot of ways empaths feel things and experience things such deep level, sometimes they find it difficult to be in close, sustained relationships because that sort of heightened experience is happening all the time. And it's a little harder to take steps back. And empaths usually have strong intuition. So they have gut reactions to things, and they can tell when something feels off. And often empaths will pick up on subtle cues that other people may not even notice yet. And so trusting the intuition can guide them to make decisions. However, sometimes it can make them look impulsive. Have you ever been in a situation? I think I know the answer already because I know my answer, but have you ever been in a situation where your feeling of empath might have made you look impulsive?
Oh yeah, for sure. As a matter of fact, for many, many years, well, probably still, I don't even know, but I was known as the emotional sister. And it wasn't because I cried all the time. It was because I cared all the time. I cared all the time. And I would make, what they considered impulsive decisions. I would answer the call in some cases that they thought I should, think through more. And I am very much a trust your gut kind of person because of the fact that I've had many experiences where when I've trusted my gut, it's been a big deal. It's been an important thing that, things would have turned out very differently if I had not.
Yeah. And for me, the converse has been true where I didn't trust my gut and things were worse than they could have been.
Yeah.
And I feel like for me, when I have decided to lean into it, I've gotten teased or made fun of because of basing these things on how I feel about something, air quote, versus the logic. And now, to me at least, being an empath has some to do with logic, because to get to those steps, but also the way I feel about something can be a big deal. And for a long time, I didn't trust myself anymore about trusting my feelings. I just didn't trust them. And I was talking to a friend of mine actually this morning about this topic, and she said that her gut feelings actually feel like a physical thing, where her stomach will get upset, or she'll have stomach pains and things like that. And she is able to feel how a person is energetically before they even start to speak or anything like that. And she'll just have a visceral response. And she said, when I feel those things, I just cut it off right then and I just step away, because she said, I've learned that this is my warning sign that if I listen to this, then I'll stay comfortable, safe, however you want to say it. And if I don't, there's always a negative result. And, she said it's not as if they're big earth-changing negative results sometimes, but there's still negative results.
One thing I was going to say is typically when I have gut feelings, if you will, they're more of on a positive note, and you should do this, or could go to this thing, or look at this thing, or walk into this room. I feel like, I think I've told this story before on the podcast, and I know we repeat a lot of stories, and I'm sorry, we just don't have many stories. No, I'm just kidding. But, a lot of stories cross over many of our topics. And when my oldest son was 6 weeks old, he was sick, and I took him to the urgent care. So it was after hours. So I took him to the urgent care, and I was like, there's something wrong with him. And they're like, what's wrong with him? And I'm like, well, I don't know. There's just something wrong with him. I can't tell you what is wrong with him. I can't give you a specific symptom. All I can tell you is he's not acting like himself. And the doctor at the time was like, how could you possibly know what his self is? He's 6 weeks old. And he was a real jerk about it. Yeah, he was a real jerk about it. And he's like, he has a low-grade fever, which is perfectly normal for a 6-week-old, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whatever. Anyway, I was like, dude, I'm telling you, there's something wrong with him. And I was crying, of course. And so he, just to, I think, get me out of his office and to appease me, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to send you to pediatrics at the local hospital, and they'll do some tests and whatever, right? And I could tell when I got there that he had passed along that I was a hysterical mother, hysterical new mother that was acting crazy. And so they were also just not really not professional, and just quite cold. And to some degree, as a nurse, I guess, when you're on the lookout for Munchausen by proxy or whatever, I can see being wary, but being mean is just not cool. Anyway,
it does not help.
It does not help. And long story short, they did a spinal tap on him. They did a bunch of tests. And not only was he sick, he had whooping cough, RSV, and pneumonia all at the same time. And had I taken him home, from the urgent care, it would have progressed so rapidly. And who knows what would have happened? Who knows?
Even if you weren't to have died or something, which obviously would have been horrible, it still would have been a much worse experience.
Exactly.
For both of you.
And harder to treat and all of that. Yeah. And I do attribute part of it to maternal instinct, but I also think that maternal instinct is another form of being an empath. And I agree with you in the differentiation of empathy and being an empath, in the sense that, to put it in a probably weird way, but to try to simplify it, empathy is a normal everyday human experience, whereas being an empath is more of a mystical or spiritual experience, where it's just your empathy is elevated. So oftentimes empaths will take on all of the feelings of people around them, or take on fears or take on even pain, things like that. And I think that it's important to note that it's not always get the hell out of here gut feeling.
Right.
Sometimes it's a get the hell in there gut feeling.
Exactly. And we had a recent podcast drop about witching hour, where it talks about where those feelings and gifts and things like can be strengthened. And when you said mother's intuition, I feel like that might be one of those times that as mother, that especially of young children, I don't even know if it's just young children, but just especially being a mother can strengthen those empathic feelings because we're so connected to someone else. And you said that empaths tend to take on other people's emotions and feelings. And that's one of the things that has been found too, is that empaths lack the filter that most people use to block those sensations or feelings from others. And it can be based on excessive stimulation, excessive emotions and energies in a group. And it isn't even necessarily a positive or negative thing like you just said, but hectic environments, big personalities, and loud sounds can overwhelm them. And I know that there are times that for me, all of that can be true. I'm very much an extrovert, but sometimes I just have to walk away because it's too much, not even in a dark way, just too much. And we were somewhere the other day, and I don't remember where we were, but we were in a crystal shop, in a rock shop. And Max was with me, and he said, take your time, look at all the things you want. I get to step out, because and I was nearly complete anyway. So I finished looking and I walked out and I said, are you all right? And he said, yeah, just all of a sudden I was just overwhelmed in there. And I believe, as we've talked about with our crystal episode and our gemstone episode and all the things, is those energies come from the crystals and stones in their history, or from the people who had held them or had them before. And so sometimes we just get to step away from that sensitivity to surroundings. And Dr. Judith Orloff is someone who's looked at all kinds of emotional things and mental health things and things like that. And she said that empaths are basically emotional sponges, and because they absorb the world's joys and stresses. And so they bring heart and care to the world, and they feel things very deeply. Like you said, you were the emotional sister. And I know that there have been a lot of times in my life where people just say, stop worrying about it. Worry isn't a word they often use, but they is it, but it's not like I sit there and worry, but it's on my mind. And in part of the conversation I had with my friends this morning about empath is one of my friends said that she always worries about her family. She doesn't worry about other people as much, but always her family, if there's anything going on. And she was talking to myself and another person who actually we're going to have on the podcast, probably we're going to interview next week. And she is very much an empath. And we were talking with our friend about how to keep herself comfortable with those feelings. I mean, what is the feeling happening from? Why is it going to serve anything? Is it serving you? That kind of thing. And that's something we'll talk a little bit more about, how empaths can keep themselves comfortable and or safe, if you will. As I've mentioned before, I don't prefer the word safe because to me that brings in the feeling of fear. Right. Yeah, so to me, I prefer comfortable. But again, some people think that words don't matter. I am actually of the belief that words are very important and they do matter, and the energy behind them makes a big difference. But maybe that's because I'm an empath. Could be. But also just remember that being an empath can be a good thing. It can be a gift or it can be a challenge. It just really basically depends on how a person approaches it. One of the most important things is to remember self-care and healthy boundaries to manage this extra sensitivity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along. So there are different kinds of empaths or empathy. Now, as far as being just a general empath, there's actually a test a person can take, which is a test that talks about the empathetic concern and perspective taking scale. I didn't even know there was a test for this, but it's called the Interpersonal Reactivity Index. And if a person scores high on that, they are considered highly empathetic. And basically there are several signs, and I think we've touched on a few of them, but that someone's empathetic or an empath. And researchers have found some scientific explanation for these traits. And also they noticed that people who are empathetic will do some things that other people don't necessarily. And one of the things is unconsciously mirroring another person's movements. So say a person is very empathetic with someone, they will unconsciously mirror that person. And which I have never noticed, and I must do it, I imagine. But they say even on MRI scans, they show that there's a neural relay in the brain that allows the empath to mimic the postures, mannerisms, and facial expressions of others. So MRI of two people and see which one, I'm not sure how that got tested. I didn't look up any studies on it, but I thought, well, so does that mean that people that aren't especially empathetic have a different result on a scan? I don't know. But I thought, wow, also, how do people think of studying these things?
People just come up with stuff.
I guess that's true. But what's also interesting about this is the mimicry that they do, especially, I say they, I mean, I consider myself an empath, but that we do maybe applies to tiny movements too, not just big things. But if a person who is an empath sees somebody being pricked with a needle, they'll pull back too. They'll do the same physical response that the person receiving it is doing. So then I was thinking about that as a relationship of being a nurse. Now, I don't know if I've ever done that. I do know that when I feed someone, I open my mouth, or if I'm doing a massage and I want someone to breathe differently, I will model the breath, and almost every time someone will follow, especially if I do it obviously.
Right.
But that's different. That's patterning, I think. But I thought, gosh, as a nurse, if I was starting an IV, did I also pull back? I think not, because if I had, that IV wouldn't have started very well. But I wonder if my natural impulse would have been to pull back. Not sure. What do you think?
I've definitely experienced the like empathic like startle or whatever. There's actually been times when I've been like, oh, that didn't happen to me. Oops. Right? Like awkward.
Right.
But well, I have a funny story actually. I don't even know if this relates to me and my weird tangents, but when I was in nursing school, actually I do think it relates. When I was in nursing school, my school, their way of learning to do shots, intramuscular shots, was with an orange. And, you know, we filled a syringe with water, saline, I don't know, but whatever. We filled a syringe. And then, you know, they were teaching us, you know, you kind of throw it like a dart and all of this stuff, right? And so when the time came for me to practice this shot on this orange, I'd go to do it and I'd be like, okay, here we go. 1, 2, I can't do it. Like
the poor orange.
Yes, exactly. It probably took me 6 times before I could stab this poor orange to give it a shot of saline, right? And I felt so silly, but at the same time, I felt it so authentically, right? And now, you know, as a long-term nurse, I'm just like, here's your shot, enjoy, bye, sorry, hope it didn't hurt.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was such an interesting experience because, I mean, did that orange feel that shot? I don't know, but you know, most people would say no. But man, it was really hard for me to, and I wasn't even like thinking of the orange as a person. I wasn't thinking, I just didn't want to put a needle in that orange.
Oh my goodness.
In that poor orange.
That is funny, right. Because I suspect orange probably did not feel it, given the fact that technically probably orange was dead once it came off the tree. If it was ever probably a sentient, I don't think they're sentient beings, but I understand the principle behind it. That's funny. One thing that, if the orange had actually been a person, that what they did find on these MRI studies is that when a highly empathetic individual observes another person who is experiencing something, a range of motion, a physical response or something, when they have the MRIs that are comparison in comparison, the two brains respond in the same neural circuits. So if I see you being burnt, I would probably pull back and my brain would fire in the same place as yours did being burnt. Now, I imagine it would be a shorter experience because I wasn't still having stuff going on and you might be. But I think that's amazing. And it's just kind of mind-boggling that could be the case, isn't it?
It is. The first degloving injury I ever saw as a nurse, I could feel it was a foot. And without being too graphic for our listeners, I don't even know how to say this not too graphically.
I don't think you can. Degloving is quite a graphic injury. If you want to look into it, feel free on your own time, but it's most unpleasant. Go ahead.
Yeah. So that's I don't think we can describe it not graphically. Anyway, I felt it in my foot. I mean, I could feel, I felt just the exposure and the, like, I couldn't believe it because my foot was perfectly fine, right? Like, and it was just, that was my very first, like, true empathic experience when I was nursing, beyond giving shots to oranges.
So much different. And that segues into the next thing I was going to talk about is there was a small study. It was just of 16 women. So some people would consider this not even statistically relevant, but they had 16 women who received an electrical shock when they were hooked up to an imaging machine. And when they got the shock, I mean, it wasn't deadly or anything. It was just a shock. The machine showed which area of their brains were activated when in pain. And then the researchers then took these women and their spouses, and they told the women that their spouse was going to receive this shock while in another room. And the women's brain used similar areas as when the researchers shocked them, and they received pain even though they weren't getting the shock, but their spouse was.
Interesting.
So it is, because that connection is something that they discovered. Now, I don't know if it mattered if they liked their husband or didn't like their husband or were happy or not, but it showed activity in the same part of the brain that they had when they received their own personal shock. And it's just fascinating that this could be a thing. And I wondered too, if it would matter how close the relationship was.
And that's what I was going to say. It makes me wonder also about twin path, right? Like, we've all heard you're a twin, as some of our listeners may or may not know. I have twins. I'm not one, but I have twins. And we've all heard stories of something happening to one twin, across the country, and the other twin just knowing that it happened, or having some sort of, disruption in their own
the matrix.
Yeah. And so it makes me wonder, if that's, we'll call it spouse path. It's similar to twin path, is to twimpathy.
Empathy. It's a good question, because my sister and I are identical twins, and there have been a couple of times where we felt like that happened, but it hasn't been an overwhelming experience as in every time, which is good. I'm grateful for that, for both of us, because we've had a lot of stuff, but I feel like there are some twins who have that more, and I don't know if it's based on their relationship or their I don't know how it works.
It even could be nurture versus nature, right?
Yeah, it could be. But
I have had one of my twins call me and just say, something's not right with the other twin, and it specifically feels like a headache behind my left eye, or specifically feels like sadness or whatever. And I have gone and followed up, and it's been legitimate, right? And so it's certainly something that I've witnessed myself. Again, I've heard lots of stories about it, and so it's also just an interesting concept to me, because what I wonder, this is just off the cuff, I also wonder if twins are more likely to be empathic than non-twins.
I hadn't considered that when I was doing research, so it would be an interesting question to ask, and I don't know the answer to that either. But it wouldn't be surprising, I think. But I think like you were saying, nurture versus nature. I'm wondering how much of that would be because twins have been together at least usually until they're about 18, their whole lives, pretty much all the time. Mm-hmm. So is that going to be different than a sibling that is very close? Or a spouse that is very close. I don't know if it would be statistically different, but it would be interesting to look at.
So siblings or twins that hate each other versus spouses that have a deep love for each other, right? Would there be a difference there?
Yeah, I would suspect so, just based on connection, but
I agree.
It's hard to say. We'll have to do a scientific study, and it should include more than the two of us, which is usually what our studies include, is ourselves and our families. And I don't see why it's not valid. But another thing about empaths that is brought up quite often is that empaths are generally faster to recognize emotions, and they can see emotions in other people faster. And when I say see, I don't mean, there's someone holding a sign that has a smiley face or a frowny face, but they can see it, especially threatening facial expressions. When an empath sees that, it's noticed more quickly, which we'll talk a little bit about what that could be about later, but I wanted to bring that up now. But they also say that the quicker reaction, and this has been studied in a bunch of different groups, it comes with a more accurate assessment of the person's facial expressions. So when people who are highly empathetic, they are noticing the things that are threatening, happy, or neutral faster than other people. And I know that for me, a threatening look especially is really fast on the radar. It's like, oh, why are they mad? And that's part of being an empath too, is being worried about why people are mad. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And also people who are highly empathetic have traits that show that they're more likely to try new things than other people. And they are more likely to approach new situations if they see other people enjoying themselves. Even if it's something that they maybe didn't think about doing before, if they're seeing other people enjoy themselves, then they're more likely to give it a go. They're also, on the other side of it, less likely to try new things if they think people aren't having fun or they're in any sign of distress. It's like, nope, not going to even try that one. That does not look like a good time. And which I was thinking about too, because some people look like they're in distress when they're not. So I wonder if people who are empaths look at people, and some people will grimace when they're concentrating, and that doesn't mean they're not having a good time, they're just concentrating. So I wonder if an empath is going to be turned away from something based on that. But then again, if they're feeling their emotions, even if the face looks like a grimace, then maybe they can tell that they're enjoying it. These are just the little areas my mind circle around in. But I thought that was funny. They see people in distress, they're like, nope, not going there. Not interested. I get that. I don't prefer distress. Have enough generally.
No kidding. When I was younger, well, who knows about today even, but when I was younger, I used to be considered the baby whisperer at my daycare because I could take any baby that nobody else could get to settle down and just get them to settle down, doing the same actions, that the other people had been trying. And there was just something about me and my energy, I guess, that I could get babies to settle down. And it carried through to my nieces and nephews and to some of the neighbors' kids that I babysat as an adult. And I think it relates again back to that micro expressions or whatever, because I think it's easier to calm a baby, for example, if you're not putting out this feeling of frustration or this feeling of like, I don't want to do this or this sucks or whatever, right? And so I think that that's one of the keys that you could use to differentiate an empath from an empathetic person.
Sure. And I feel like to go along with that, babies and animals are usually the best judge of characters if they're allowed to be.
Yeah.
And for some reason, my reels have started to include the king's horses. So the horses at Buckingham Palace that guard, they have soldiers on them that guard. There's big signs next to the horses saying these horses are trained to maintain their space. They're trained to be protective. They will bite you and they may kick you. So back off.
Right.
Well, people ignore the sign all the time, and the guard doesn't do anything to stop the horse because the horse is trained to do what it's doing.
Right.
The horse will nip at people. They'll knock people with their heads and things if they come too close. But what I've noticed and in the videos is if a person has some sort of disability, or if they're a small child, or some people, some adults, they won't respond that way too. And I'm sure that they're feeling the energy of the person.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
and most of the adults that are non-appearing to be handicapped are female that the horse responds in a positive way to. And also the small children are handicapped people. And it's been really fun to watch that, although I look at the sign going, can you read? But
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily want to walk up to a horse, especially a big giant horse like those are, but to watch the results is kind of heartwarming in some ways because it's like the code. I mean, and also you hear, if my dog likes you, then you're probably a good person.
It's funny. This is a sort of, again, I tend to go on these tangents, but at first when I thought of it, I'm like, that's not related. Don't be stupid. But it reminds me of when you and I were in England with Holly, and that man came out of that house, that townhouse, and he was like, let me show you like true London. And he showed us like Prince Charles's, not secret house, but like regular house. Anyway, long story short, we had no reason to trust this guy. We really, I mean, according to statistics, had every reason not to trust this guy, right?
True. Yeah.
And yet all of us who are all empaths, all of us were like, this guy's safe. Yeah, just can't explain it. We knew he was safe. And particularly Holly Sue, who has a lot of PTSD from not trusting her gut when she knew someone wasn't safe. So when she goes, when she knows empathically that someone's safe, like, to me, that like 10 times my belief in my feelings. And it was a delightful adventure. Instead of running away, like saying your gut saying, I can trust this. This is okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as we give our medical warnings, we also give warnings that if it doesn't seem like a safe plan, even if your gut is saying, sure, go into a dark alley with this guy, wisdom is the best course, but it's true that it was having that feeling and that response was true. And I actually had forgotten about that until you just reminded me. That was an awesome day. But, so thanks for sharing that. Sure. Also, one of the things about empaths is they really are more likely to hesitate to harm someone else because they know how it feels.
Yes.
And I am always saying to people, hey, if I don't want it done to me, I'm not going to do it to you. Right. And like Max will say, you can wake me up in the night if you have a question or, whatever. I'm like, no, because sleep to me is precious. And if I'm awakened in the middle of the night, I will be up for hours. So don't even think about it.
Right.
And, but he's like, I fall back asleep. I said, yes, I still love you, even though you do. But I won't do something to someone else that I know I wouldn't like. And I believe that part of that is empathy, because no, I'm not going to do it to you if I think, unless I have to, like I say, as a nurse or something. There are some things that I have gotten to do as a nurse that I know wasn't comfortable, but I also knew it had to be done. And that's a little different. Another thing that's fascinating is that people who have high empathy may have amygdala. Did I say that right? The part of the brain that is more, thank you, that is more responsive to distress signals than others. And the amygdala responds to fear, sadness, and pain. So there may be a physiological difference in empathetic people. So that's always interesting. But there are some drawbacks and some benefits from being an empath. And we've talked about some of the drawbacks potentially is feeling overwhelmed, hesitating to connect, feeling people's distress, and things like that. However, being an empath or having empathy assists to maintain social bonds, because people, especially people say who are on the spectrum, have a difficult time being empathetic to other people's situations. They just can't always get it. They may be able to be trained to see it, but they may never feel it.
Right.
And that's okay. I mean, those things are trainable, as we know with certain kids and other individuals that we deal with, that they may know the clues to look for, but they may never feel it.
On the flip side, I have 3, possibly 4 kids on the spectrum, and on the flip side, 2 of my kids are existentially empathic and empathetic. And the same sort of thing, I've had to like help them to rein that back a little bit, because it does make them existential, and that gives them so much stress and that sort of thing. So it's interesting how the autism spectrum can kind of sometimes amplify that one way or the other.
Yeah. And that's why so many things are spectrums, because there's going to come out a spectrum one day for all of the rest of us with the spectrums we're on. And I look at, and some of the things I notice about myself is like, yeah, that seems like a spectrum thing. That seems like an ADHD thing. Well, is it just a human thing? I don't know. But that's one thing that I was talking with my friends about this morning as well. And when is it a air quote legitimate thing versus excuse, where we say, oh my gosh, I'm having a lot of anxiety? Is it that we're having actual anxiety, or are we having a situation that we don't know how to handle? Is it really an anxiety disorder, or is it change? And lots of people don't like change. So is it an excuse, or is it a situation, or is it a diagnosis? And, that is probably neither here nor there, but I feel like sometimes some of these diagnoses, and I'm not by any means belittling anxiety, panic disorder, or anything like that, but what I'm wondering is if sometimes we get to push a little bit more through these things than we may be doing for ourselves. Say I feel uncomfortable because I'm looking for a new job. Well, if I don't push through that, then I probably won't find a new job.
Yeah.
And how is that dealt with? And I'm not attempting in any way to figure out how to deal with all of those disorders that are given. I just am postulating that perhaps if we push through a little bit more, we may find out if it's a situation or a symptom. Does that make sense?
And I think, it does. And I think that in parenting, a lot of times with our kids, we have to guide them through that, because, I feel like life is a whole lot scarier for kids because they haven't had 40, 50 years of experiencing it, right? They've had 15. And so it's like, it's funny because we always talk about, learn from my mistakes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we really never think about, at least I just realized I don't think about, really how terrifying those kinds of things can be when really you don't have anything to compare it to, particularly if you haven't gone through it yet. If there's with that first time you have to break through that terrifying barrier. That's scary. And so I think that it would behoove us to remember, in our empathic experiences, to remember that our teenagers, our young adults are not experiencing life the way we are, because I mean, aside from just the world changing, right? Just aside from everything around them being different than it was for us at their age, we've simply been here longer.
Well, yeah, the thing that just came to my mind is that we have stepped off the metaphorical curb or cliff enough times to know that there's something below it, right? And people who have less experience for whatever reason, even if they're adults and still haven't experienced some things, they still haven't stepped off that and found that there's another side. Well, and moving on from this portion of the discussion to the mystic empath. And it's a little bit different because, like I said, when I think of empathetic and empath, I've always thought they were two separate things. And now after doing the research in our discussion, I realized that they do overlap and they crisscross. The difference that I found as a mystic empath is that it can be a bridge between the seen and unseen realms.
Mm-hmm.
And more than just feeling other people's energies, they perceive beyond the surface and find hidden energies or dimensions. And these intuitive abilities will often lead to psychic skills, insights in the paranormal, or what other people consider the other side. And I think of the people that we've interviewed who have been psychic mediums or somehow channeling that. I'm sure, because I know the people that we've talked with so far, that they are all empaths. And now some of them have said they've developed the skills. Some of them said that they have just had the skills always. But some of the key traits of a mystic empath is that intuition, like we talked about, that it's a very high level of intuition. And an empath the mystic empath who has their gifts, quote, working for them, trust their inner knowing, and they can sense things that other people might miss. Because we've also talked with quite a few of our guests about, was there a time where they turned these gifts off? And almost every single one of them has said, yes, for this reason or that. And so people will turn them on and off, as it were. I don't really think that once a person who is a mystic empath has leaned into the skill can truly turn it all the way off, but they can sort of dampen it, perhaps, or ignore it, really, I think is the only thing. I think it's just ignored as best as can be happening. But some of these psychic gifts can be clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, and those are different levels of the clairs, if you will. Some are the sense and the smells and things like that. So the clairvoyance is just seeing beyond the physical. Clairsentience is feeling the energy. And some people, when they say they're clairsentient, they actually see energy. And our listeners can't hear me doing my air quotes because some people feel like seeing energy is not possible. But the people who are clairsentient, and I am one of them, sees energy.
I feel like if you can see music, you can see energy, right? And we've scientifically proven that people can see music. So
yeah. Well, not we, Crystal and I. But
no, I have not scientifically proven it.
People who have studies beyond themselves have actually proven that. Exactly. And clairaudience is what you're referring to, and that's hearing. I feel like it's hearing messages from spirit or hearing that music, which to me is a spiritual gift. And
I'm saying that people can see music as colors, like literally.
Oh, yes,
colors.
Yes.
And so I'm saying we humanity has scientifically proven that to be true. So if you can see music as colors, why can't you see energy?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So.
Yes. And then also mystic, intuitive, or empath, understands the unseen. And so they, like mystic detectives, explore the mysteries of existence, seek answers beyond the material world. And this curiosity will lead a lot of mystic empaths beyond the material world. And they explore mystical practices, spiritual practices, metaphysics, and have esoterical knowledge or questions like we were just doing, esoterical questions going, and also it's a person that has a compassionate and open heart. And most empaths feel deeply and compassionately, and their hearts will remain open even when faced with life's difficulties and challenges. So mystic empath and empaths also, probably this covers all empaths, but especially mystic empaths, often keep themselves. They look for solitude and need that time alone to process their experiences, partially because these experiences go so deep and are so emotional that after I talk to people who have been to a big, say, metaphysical event, and they need a couple of days to decompress between all of the energy, all of the sounds, all of the stimulation, and all of the channeling that they may have done, whatever that looks like for them. They may need time apart. And And also a lot of challenges that a mystic empath, or also empaths generally, have is that they have trouble with the tension between their need for privacy and their longing to be seen and understood. So some people will hesitate to say anything about their gifts, but they also want to have people know that they have these gifts. So it's really can be a real challenge. And I feel like the people who are able to balance that are the people who are most comfortable. And so one of the things that my friends and I were talking about this morning is, what do we do if we are an empath and we are feeling uncomfortable, like my one friend? What do we do? So we were talking about a couple of things. One of the things we talked about is to just observe people's energies, situations, experiences, but don't absorb those feelings. Don't take them into yourself. Don't feel the prick of their finger being poked, and create healthy boundaries, because it's really easy to lean too far in to other people. And we talked also about shielding ourselves from that energy of chaos or a lower vibration, or however you like to talk about it. And I was talking about something I've talked about before, is shielding myself with a visualization of a waterfall coming around me, the crystals and the colors and all of the things, but that it's clear so I can see through it, but it also feels like it's cleansing me as well. And my friend talked about it, and she said she envisions getting in Cinderella's pumpkin carriage. She said, because I love it, and I get in there and I close the door, and the only thing or people that can get in are the ones I open the door for. Right. I'm like, I like that. And that's really cool. And she also talked about something that we were discussing about how some of what we experience may be our ego. And she said that she learned a long time ago that if she was feeling stress or worry or anxiety about something, was it coming from her ego or the actual events? And she said that our ego she was taught a long time ago, she said that our ego just needs a job. And so sometimes that she wants the ego to just hush up now and give it a job. And the job could be, she said, this particular individual we were talking to, is the ego gets to consider whether this worry or whatever is going to be useful or not to me or the people around me. And if it's not, just filter it out. Just take it away. And that's the ego's job. So the ego gets out of the way. And I liked that idea. Yeah. And then also we can clear unwanted energy. There's lots of different ways to do that. And I believe we'll be touching on that when we go into the Reiki discussion. But there are ways to do that. People will do it physically. They'll physically wipe their body. They'll brush off negative energy or dark energy. And just getting that out of their space, or envisioning it gone, or transmuting into the earth and coming back as light, or any of those sorts of things. And those are really important steps. The other things are, stay out of unhealthy situations, avoid unhealthy partners, one-sided relationships, and narcissists. Narcissists really, really look for empaths, because then they can be wrapped around their little fingers. And we won't go into discussion about exactly what all of that is, but just know that if your body, your psyche, your heart is saying a situation is dangerous, listen to it. And that can be one of those situations that is. So those are the things that I found just fascinating about empaths and mystic empaths, which are very similar to me. The mystic empath is taking things just that step further, and also into the more mystic realm, whatever that looks like for a person, whether it's past life, next life, alternate lives, parallel lives, whatever is out there. That's the next step, the way I see it. Did you have any other thoughts on being a mystic or a mystic empath or any of that?
Not that I could think of.
Excellent. Well, I have really enjoyed looking into this as clarity for myself, what being empathetic versus a mystic empath can mean. And as always, we'd love to hear from our listeners if they have experiences they'd like to share about this. And we invite you also to look at our Patreon, because we have some levels of membership that we'd love to look in that comes with gifts and opportunities. And so that is a fun thing that we've got started.
Also, if you have any topics that you think would be interesting for us to cover, please let us know.
Exactly. We'd love to hear from our listeners. To leave a comment, share a story, or ask a question, email us at listeners@mysticdetectives.com. You can also find out about our Patreon and other interesting things going on at our website, mysticdetectives.com. As always, we invite you to subscribe, share, and leave reviews to support the podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Stay curious
and keep exploring.